Welcome to the Equinety Podcast, where horse owners just like you share their incredible Equinety stories and how Equinety is changing their horses' lives. Whether you're searching for something to give your performance horse better focus, faster recovery, and more stamina, or in the extreme case where all hope seems lost, give your horse what it needs to help heal at a cellular level, you'll find it here. So jump in on today's episode to hear how Equinety is helping horses worldwide. Now, welcome your host, John Dowdy.
Hello and welcome to another Equinety Podcast. This week, we are going to swing up into Mooreville, Mississippi, and we've got a 13-year-old Savannah Shumpert on the podcast this week, and I am excited to have you on. Savannah, welcome to the Equinety Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here and tell about how Equinety has helped my two horses.
Oh, that's great. Well, now you've been riding for, since you could walk, I hear. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir. I've just been riding ever since I was old enough to even have a concept of what a horse was. I remember when I was really little, my dad actually bought me and my sister a saddle, and we were actually too little to know what it was. So we were like, is it a Barbie? And he's like, no, it's a saddle.
Barbie, that's pretty good. So, so you started riding at an early age, and then you obviously loved what you were doing. So you started competing right away. How old were you when you started competing?
I would say when I started seriously riding a big horse at shows, I was about 8 or 9.
Okay, and we're talking barrel racing here.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay, and what's also most impressive at age 13 here, you have qualified for a few very large events. Tell us about the things you've qualified for.
Yes, sir. Well, last year I qualified for the Junior NFR. This year at the All-American Youth Race back in June, I qualified for the Junior American. And in April, I qualified for the 1D shootout at the BBR World Finals. That'll be taking place next year. And in the finals, I qualified in the Fast 50. That's this year. That
is quite impressive.
Thank you.
So, so let's jump right in. And coming from a performance horse, which we're going to talk about two different horses. One of them is a 21-year-old gelding that had foundered. And tell us, or give us a little bit of background on this horse, what was going on, what you were kind of doing prior to using the Equinety, and then we'll get into what advances the Equinety's made.
Yes, sir. Okay, so we got Lina Barbie, or I'm just going to call him B. We got him around, I would say, December of 2017. And he was doing fine, and so around May, my mom and dad took him down to get just some yearly injections. So everything was going fine, and then his feet started swelling. We gave him some pain medicine, and it began a snowball effect, and he began to founder. So his joints swelled up, and then we took him to Outlaw Equine in Texas, and he spent the whole summer there. So after we got him back, we didn't really know how to get his feet back to where he could walk. So my dad started him on Equinety, and it has been amazing how it has repaired his feet, because he's 21, and we didn't think he was going to survive a second case of founder. So just for him to be sound is amazing.
Right. So he's been on Equinety now for how long?
I believe he's been on Equinety for about a year.
Okay. And so what have you noticed then in the year since he's been on the Equinety?
I've noticed that his coat, before we put my other horse on it, he was the best looking thing in the barn, which was amazing because he'd been turned out a year. His coat was shiny and slick, and his feet looked incredible. Just the front of his feet looked so good, and you would pick them up, and they looked so much better than they did when we got him. He started out with these special shoes to help him get over his foundering, and eventually we got to take those off, and his feet just looked so much better.
Yeah, and you had mentioned that you were having to give yearly injections. Have you had to do that since using the Equinety?
Well, we haven't been hauling him since we put him on Equinety, So that's part of the reason we haven't given him any injections, because he hasn't been running anywhere, but we have not felt the need to give him any injections.
Okay, great.
We're just starting to get him back into shape.
Sure. So he's been a bit of a work in progress. Haven't been able to ride him yet, but the progress that he has made has, been leaps and bounds, which you would attribute to Equinety.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's great. Now, I'll take just a little bit of a time out here, just for those that are tuning in for the first time and maybe wondering what this Equinety stuff is, or you've been following us on Facebook and trying to figure out how can this product do all of this stuff. Well, the Equinety, it's 100% pure amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. There's no fillers, no sugars, no starches. There's no loading dose. Serving size is 5.2 grams, which is just shy of a tablespoon, just used as a top dressing. And the amino acids are specifically formulated to stimulate the pituitary gland, which is the master gland in the body, and that releases the necessary hormones which help heal at a cellular level. So this is why the product helps in so many ways. And in this particular instance, Savannah, that you were talking about with your 21-year-old, we had a foundere issue, injections, stronger hooves, coat, softer coat and mane. Now, although he's not back to the point where you can ride, just the progress that he's made. And the reason I was asking specifically about the injections, because we hear this all the time, horses that typically have routine injections, when they're using the Equinety, they seem to not have to have them as often, and sometimes not at all. It just depends on the severity of what's going on. And in this case, because you haven't been hauling, he hasn't been under the pressure and the stress and everything. So hopefully as you progress along here, things will continue to move along where you don't have to give the injections at all. But that's pretty awesome. So now that's a horse, as he comes back, you had mentioned to me your little sister would probably be taking him over riding, because you have another horse this is your main horse. Yeah, so this horse is the one that's qualified you for all the things that you talked about earlier. Talk about this mare for a bit.
Okay, this is my favorite example of how Equinety has helped. So this is Broadway Lainie. She's a 14-year-old mare. She typically clocks in the 1D where we take her, but about 6 months into having her, she began to develop anxiety when it was time to go in the gate, backing up, and she didn't want to go in, which was opposite of what previously she'd been wanting to go in too quick. So we knew something was wrong. So we took her to the vet, and it turned out that she had only 4 millimeters in one of her soles. Now, for scale, horses should have at least 10 millimeters in every sole. Her worst sole only had 4. So we put her on Equinety, and in about 5 months of having her on it, her soles had 16 millimeters. And before we put her on Equinety, her shoulders had been coming out of alignment, which was part of the reason that she didn't want to go in the gate, because her shoulders hurt. So 5 months later, when she had 16 millimeters of sole, her shoulders had stayed in. They didn't need to be adjusted anymore because her soles were so much better, and they weren't throwing her shoulders out of alignment. So her gait has gotten so much better. But it's just incredible to me that, she had 4 millimeters, and she had 4 times the sole in 5 months.
Right.
That's incredible.
That is incredible. And it's probably one of the more often or most often questions that we get. People are calling in because they're having problems with the hooves. Without healthy feet, you don't have much of a horse that can do anything. And so this is one of the things that most often people ask about is, can Equinety help with the hoof and make for a stronger hoof growth? And, if this is something that has been battled for a while, and the proof is in the pudding on this one, I would say.
I would say that Equinety, its best quality is hoof growth. Because with both of my horses, their hooves have gotten so much better. And another thing it does really well is it makes their coats especially shiny. When I hold my mare to the show, I always like her to look healthy and ready to run, so it's always great when her coat looks amazing.
Sure, absolutely. Now, you had talked also that her shoulder was out all the time. tell us how often, when you take her to the vet, how often she would have to be adjusted and what was going on specifically there prior to the Equinety.
Well, anytime we saw with Dr. Gregory Ford, that's who we like to let her get adjusted. So anytime we saw him, we would let him check her shoulders and her back and make sure everything was in alignment. And before we put her on Equinety, anytime we saw him, her shoulder would be out. And it would be just because we've been running her or because she'd been hauled in the trailer, and just anything could throw her shoulder out. And that's got to hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So after we put her on Equinety, I don't think she's had her shoulders adjusted since. I can count at least 4 times I've taken her to Dr. Ford and been like, do you need to adjust her shoulder? And he said, no, her shoulder's still in place. Everything's good. And I would definitely say that's because her soles have gotten so much better.
Right. Now, one of the other things that you noticed is her stride, because she's not a big horse, but tell us about what was going on with her stride.
Yes, sir. That's really why I like her, is because she's small enough that I can get on by myself. And even though she's a little horse, she has a ginormous stride. She just takes these giant steps. And when we got her, she was taking those big strides. And then the more I ran her, the smaller her stride got when she was trotting around. Especially, I took her to a show one time, and it was pretty hard back in that warm-up pen, and she just didn't want to trot at all. And that's when I knew something was wrong, because 3 months ago I had taken her to that exact same warm-up pen, and she'd been stretching out fine. So we knew something was wrong. And after we put her on Equinety, she's gotten her big stride back. Told you should have seen her long trotting this past weekend. It was amazing. She just stretched her legs out so far.
Yeah.
So you're so little. How do you stretch your legs out that far? But you can definitely tell she feels better.
Right. And probably along that's coming with that is, the fast recovery, more stamina, the focus, which are all the things that you need in a performance horse, overall health-wise in general as well.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's awesome. So, Savannah, one other question that I'd like to ask you, there's a lot of supplements on the market, a lot of things to choose from, and, especially the people that have been around the block more than a few times have tried lots of things, and they're somewhat skeptical when it comes to a product like this that seems to be too good to be true, we'll say. So what advice would you have to tell them, other than what you've already talked about, but what would you have to tell them, that somebody that might be sitting on the fence might get them to give it a try?
Yes, sir. Well, both of my parents are veterinarians, and they've been running barrel horses for about 20 years. And obviously they've used lots of products to try to get the horses back and healthy. And I've just we had our horses on another supplement before we put them on Equinety, and the difference was just amazing. You could really tell how much shinier their coats were than everything else in the barn. So for anyone who's skeptical about it, I would definitely say at least try it. If it's not your thing for your horse, then that's fine, but I would definitely try it, because I have had amazing results with my 2 horses.
That's awesome. Well, Savannah, I really want to thank you for taking the time to share your Equinety stories. You've got an impressive resume here at age 13, and we'll look forward to following you and with this exciting career that you have going. So, Savannah Shumpert from Mooreville, Mississippi, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
That's all for this episode of the Equinety Podcast. For more information on purchasing Equinety, be sure to visit our website at teamequinety.com, where you'll also find product information as well as more testimonials on how others have seen amazing results by implementing Equinety into their horse's supplement regime. We'll have more stories on how Equinety is helping horses worldwide right here on a future episode of the Equinety Podcast.